Chabot at the Paul Chabot Show. I'm excited to share with you this video interview. Enjoy. God bless.
Good evening. I'm Alan Jackson in Nashville. Welcome to our new show. For most people, there's enough stress in the air right now that I'm reluctant to add to it. But for your own safety, consider the possibility that you might need to call 911 someday and no one will be there to answer. Or if there was an answer, it's an automated message that suggests that you leave a message and we'll get back to you. Well, it's possible, and there's many reasons why. Defunding the police, quitting or retiring early, since a lot of police don't feel supported by the cities they live in and they themselves feel in danger. And with judges and prosecutors using the law for political objectives, far too many police feel vulnerable to becoming the victims rather than being able to help the victims they are called to serve. Well, there's certainly a lot at stake in the upcoming election. The economy, the border, the lack of a consistent foreign policy. But the increasing crime is near the top of every list in all the polls. So joining us tonight is someone who's doing as much as he can to help. He's Paul Chabot, the former Navy Reserve Intelligence Officer and White House Senior Advisor, as well as President of Law Enforcement Move, a Deputy Sheriff, and a former State Parole Board Commissioner. Welcome to the program, Paul.
Thanks, Pastor. Great to be with you and your audience again.
Well, it's good to have you back. You know, I've been fortunate to not have to call 911 anytime recently, but by all accounts, far too many of our current police force is either shrinking, either by reduced budget or reduced recruiting or by the challenge of retaining good police in large cities. Can you tell us what the real facts are? Is it as stressful as it seems to be?
You know, it is. It's disturbing. It's disheartening as well. I spent the majority of my life in law enforcement at the state or local level or working with feds on a high-intensity drug trafficking area program. I started off my career in law enforcement at the age of 16 as an explorer scout, like a Boy Scout, learning about the job in 1990. 5 years there, then became a Deputy Sheriff Reserve. Did that for 21 years. State Parole Board Commissioner, California Prison System, White House working with law enforcement justice. Law enforcement has and will always be an honorable career. However, what we're seeing in this country, I think, is very frightening. When we look at the numbers right now, especially in blue cities, law enforcement are leaving and those cities are having a very hard time recruiting. San Francisco, for example, is down about 600 officers. Baltimore is down about 700 officers. Washington, D.C. is at the smallest police force it's been in 50 years. And New York City is losing about 200 cops every single month. This problem is escalating, and there's many reasons why, as you outlined in your intro so eloquently, Pastor.
Well, you know, it's certainly an issue in this presidential election cycle. Kamala has been loudly and consistently in favor of defunding ICE, which is our immigration and custom enforcement, and moving that money to people who are anti-ICE. That cannot be good for our national security and protection.
You know, it's really not. It's frustrating when you look at our country where we are today. We are founded by volunteers, volunteer militia, firefighters, police. And today we are damning the very good people that are protecting us. If I were an advisor to Kamala Harris or any others, I would say, look, maybe your slogan should be make crime illegal again. Because right now that side of the aisle has been coddling prisoners. It's been happening for quite some time, and it is making the lives of innocent people become the victims of crime across this country. Recent Gallup poll is pretty stark if you look at this. Today, 63% of Americans feel that crime is a very serious issue. Now compare that to just 48% in 2018. Those are stark numbers when you look at where we are from a few years ago to today with how Americans feel, whether it's the wide open borders, police being attacked, or quite honestly, police afraid to do their job for fear that they will be put in jail for making a mistake.
No, you know, it's an unprecedented time. Our border's been open long enough now that we have literally tens of millions of people in our country illegally. And it seems like every week there's a report from a new city. Excuse me. It seems like every week there's a report from a new city or a new state about an act of violence. And I don't mean they're speeding when they're driving. They're raping young women. Real violent problems for people in our country illegally. Can this problem be addressed, or have we had an open border for so long there's really nothing can be done?
Yeah, there absolutely is something we can do. When you look at the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was president, DEA agent Kiki Camarena was in Mexico working for the United States, an attaché. In Mexico, he was kidnapped by a cartel. He was tortured and then killed. Ronald Reagan shut down that entire border until we got our criminals back. We can shut down the border. Historically, we've done it before, and we have not done that today because not only is one agent being killed in our country, but Americans across this country. And if they're not being killed, they're being victimized in other ways as well. We can do it if we have the political will. Ronald Reagan showed us the way to do it. And for some reason, this administration is not connecting the dots to protect its people.
Yeah, it seems like that a first assignment is to protect the citizens of this nation before we get overly concerned about the citizens of the nations of the world. This next item is even more disturbing to me. Kamala Harris is on the record of wanting to use taxpayer dollars for prisoners to transition from one gender to another, to use our taxpayer dollars to help people already in the system, in prison, men to transition to women and women to men. First of all, I don't understand what that has to do with law enforcement, and I don't understand what it has to do with taxpayer dollars. That cannot be a good idea for our country, or am I missing that? Is that really a law enforcement issue, Paul?
No, it's not. It's not a law enforcement. It's not a corrections issue. It's not a humane issue. It's not even a common sense issue. What it is, it's a very radical ideology that has quite honestly gotten away so long with moving our country in the wrong direction that all of a sudden they feel that this is the next logical step. Here's the message, though, for those that are working on Kamala's campaign. Even Democrat cities of today that had supported some of those anti-police tactics or pro-criminal policies are changing because they're seeing people leave their communities in droves. Now, we can't leave our country. We shouldn't have to leave our country. We want to stay here and fight. But the message to Kamala and others that are implementing these kind of crazy things, look at some of the most bluest cities in America in the last 6 months. San Francisco, for example, where Kamala Harris was, very involved in politics. The DA involved in so-called prosecutions didn't really happen. But even San Francisco in the last 6 months has enacted tough on crime legislation. Why? Because they're losing businesses. People aren't coming to visit. So they're finally starting to crack down on drugs. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom right now is putting police, flooding them into San Jose and other cities. These blue cities are going to the right of Kamala Harris. She is literally standing alone on this radical ideology that the American public does not support. The number one role of government is to protect its people, not to help prisoners transition from one sex to another. This experiment has gotten out of control.
Absolutely. Well, let's take a short break where you can use the time to write us an email, especially if you've got some thoughts about today's conversation. Send them to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. We'll be back with more from Paul Chabot in just a moment. We're back now with Paul Chabot, who's dedicated his life to supporting law enforcement and keeping you and your families safe. You pointed out recently some dangerous figures that were reported in the Wall Street Journal. The legalization of marijuana has resulted in at least 1,400 additional traffic fatalities each year in this country. If you go to any big city, you can smell it. You can walk down the street. The police are so busy with other issues, perhaps even drug dealers, that they have to look the other way at those who are just openly smoking it. But there are repercussions on the streets and with other associated crimes. It seems to me that to be a part of the more lax attitude towards keeping the country safe, as if there's nothing we can do about it anymore. I just refuse to accept that. Am I wrong, Paul, or can we really return to law and order?
We absolutely can return to law and order. This country was once there, although never perfect. But drug usage today continues on its upward trajectory. Fentanyl, of course, is making headlines. But we need to focus also on marijuana and CBD and these smoke shops. Here where I am in Texas, marijuana is not legal, but Congress passed what was called the Farm Bill for hemp. And how it was worded has literally allowed cartels, a lot of Chinese cartels, to flood in here to Texas, north of where I am, into Oklahoma, all the way over into California, controlling a lot of the marijuana trafficking into the CBD and other types, which are absolutely destroying our kids because many times they'll vape with what they think might be THC or marijuana, can be laced with fentanyl, and then there comes your death. Every single thing here is connected. Historically, we've done a good job at reducing drug use. Look, we've done a great job in getting people to quit smoking. To think that we can't do the same thing with marijuana is absurd. The problem is there's a political radical ideology in this country right now which is pushing outright legalization, regardless of the consequences, to our communities or our kids. And so that's the message is yes, we can, but we don't have the right leadership at the federal level to take any kind of platform on this issue today.
It's unfortunate. Paul, you've had a focus on some big issues in California, beginning with the fact that the police force there is having some serious trouble filling vacant spots, even when they're offering pay raises. What's the issue that's making all that happen there?
So I talk to police all the time at our website, lawenforcementmove.com. We help police largely move out of these blue cities to red cities. One of my first clients when we first launched Law Enforcement Move was a police officer in Southern California. This was during the riots that were happening a few years back. All of a sudden, the kids on his street, the parents wouldn't let his kids play with the police officer's son. This is somebody who's with a major police department in California for a number of years. We helped them. They moved out here to Texas. They're living the great American dream, but he's not alone. And so here's a bigger concern is follow George Soros's money. He funds the election of very radical district attorneys throughout this country. My message to law enforcement is don't work for an agency where there is county jurisdiction of a DA that is funded by George Soros because they are targeting police. And what happens is police are not going to go out there and initiate traffic stops. They're not going to go out there and look for crime as much as they would in another area because they feel like they are damned if they do and damned if they don't. But America has to ask, under this radical left ideology, do we want police to respond to crime like firemen when a call comes in? Or do we want them out there proactive, looking for crime, going down the dark alleys, doing everything that we trained them to do to keep our communities safe? Right now in these blue cities, it's fascinating because they'll tell you crime is down. It's not really down. It's just police aren't out there making arrests because they're worried about making a mistake that could land them in jail for the rest of their life. And so they're going to do what they can do just to get through. They may be 3 to 4 years to retirement, but a lot of these younger officers see the writing on the wall and they're vacating these areas and moving to other areas where the communities respect and love police.
Well, you've also suggested that Los Angeles is not a good place to hold another Olympics with the homelessness and the violence and all the problems in that city. Yeah. Have you given up on California, or do you think there's something there that can be redeemed?
You know, in the short term, California should be the canary in the coal mine to the rest of this country. Our founders were very unique in this country. They allowed states to experiment with their own laws so long as they don't violate the Supremacy Clause, federal law. So you see these blue states, California, Oregon, Washington, New York, New Jersey, experimenting with these radical pro-crime, anti-police strategies, and it's not working. It's why people are leaving. It's why crime is rising. So when you look at LA, a city I lived in, a city where I went to school 20 years ago, today it is unrecognizable with tent cities and crime and police afraid to do their jobs. LA's got a lot of work cut out to them for them to showcase LA. Right now, there's no way they can regurgitate a city based on the same policies that made it the dangerous place that it is today.
Well, Paul, quickly, what can those of us that are just average citizens, I think most of us respect our police officers, what can we do to show support and encouragement to those people who are standing between us and so many problems around us?
Yeah, look, I think here's what is not discussed, and we need to talk about it more, is like I'm retired military as well. PTSD, it's an open fact now in our community when we go to war. Your police officers, men and women, are going to war every single day on the streets. We have got to accept the fact that they are dealing with mental health just like us as veterans. They're human beings. They hurt, they cry, they are sad, they have families to go home to. We've got to understand that not only the danger of crime, is hurting them physically and emotionally, but the lack of support from political leaders. So what we can do at home, thank a cop. When you see them, thank them, give them a thumbs up, handshake. That means the world to them and their families.
That's good advice. Paul Chabot, thank you for visiting with us today, and please stay in touch as we move forward.
Thanks, Pastor. God bless you and your audience.
Well, in a moment, I'm going to have some thoughts of my own to share. We'll be right back. I believe that the health of our culture is a reflection of the health of the faith community in our nation. So when we see issues like defunding the police gain real traction across our nation, across all segments of society, it suggests to me that something has happened in the faith community, and I've invested decades there, so it's not just a random opinion, it's at least an informed one. I believe we have been defunding the authority of God within the church for a long time. We've been cultivating a faith without consequence. We wanted a heavenly God who would bless us and bring good things to our lives, but doesn't hold us accountable. We've eliminated judgment and accountability from our faith. That, to be clear, that's a false gospel. It's not based in Scripture. It's not based in the history and traditions of the church. It's not helpful for our personal spiritual formation, and it's not helpful for our larger culture. So let the change begin in our hearts. Let it begin in our churches, in our communities of faith. Let's come back to the gospel that says God will hold us accountable, that while He is a God of grace and mercy, He's also a God of judgment. There's no free pass. If there were, we wouldn't have required Jesus, God's Son, to come in the flesh and to face death on a cross. The need for the cross reminds us that God is not defunded authority. If the church will make the changes in our hearts and in our congregations, I believe those changes will be reflected in our culture and we'll respect authority in a whole new way. It's worth the effort. It'll make a difference. I still believe there are more reasons for hope than for despair. You stay with us. When we return, your emails. Thank you for taking the time to share your opinions and perspectives on our program. It's a big help to us. Dirk from Texas wrote, "How is it that no one is held accountable for their actions in violating the First Amendment to influence an election? Are there no laws against this?" There are laws against it, but what we're watching is the suspension in so many respects of our legal system. You know, censorship and propaganda is the beginning of a very precipitous downward plunge. It's followed very quickly by selective enforcement of our laws, and we're watching that. We're watching political adversaries be prosecuted in our court system and being defended by our Department of Justice. If that is allowed to continue, and if those ideas hold in place, no citizen is safe. You see, disagreement is survivable. We can disagree with one another. Censorship, we won't survive. Our democracy, our freedom, our republic will unravel if we lose the ability to have free speech. Even if it's not something we agree with, we support the people that have the right to say it. We're losing that, and we better use our voices. Krista from New York wrote, "Thank you for taking on an additional assignment in hosting a program that addresses current events from a biblical perspective. I've been raising money for our downtown Rochester, New York rescue mission for over 25 years. Thank you for that hard work. What are your thoughts on the homeless situation in our nation? What more can the local church do to make a difference in their city?" Well, the homeless situation, I believe, has been dramatically compounded by an open border and as many as 40 million people illegally coming into our nation. It's overwhelmed all of our resources, and you see our local citizens struggling with that, and it's expressed in our homelessness as clear as any single component of our culture. For the church, I think we have to remember our primary assignments. We begin with a primary agenda of the transformation of human lives. The church has an assignment, a biblical assignment, to make disciples. That means talking about sin and its consequences and the resolution for that sin. That's first and foremost. If we lose that assignment and we focus primarily on social services, which are important, if we forfeit the gospel to do social services, we become a civic club. We may have better architecture and we may have better music, but we're just a civic club. Our culture needs the church to be the church, and in doing that, we'll care for those amongst us that are less fortunate. Thank you for your comments. Make sure you send your emails to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. And from all of us here in Nashville, thank you for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.